Welcome back to the Cream City Club podcast. You are listening to episode number 44. I'm Spencer Michaelis, and I'm here as always with Gunnar Amalunk. Gunnar, how you doing tonight?
Think I'm doing good. I think we're excited to talk about the Bucks. I'm not sure yet, but a couple weeks have passed, so maybe it won't be as hostile in here. So, how you feeling about talking about the Bucks?
I'm feeling all right about talking about the Bucks. Yeah, you're right. It was good that we gave ourselves a little cooling down, a little bit of time to cool down, and we can look at it from a little bit of a wider scope now and not have to focus on all the negative of that ending to the season. But before we get into any of that, if you are listening and you haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you are on. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these episode releases. And as we just talked about, it's going to be a Bucks focused episode here. So Gunnar, what are we going to talk about?
We'll be wrapping up the season in general. We'll touch on obviously the playoff series that ended. We're not going to go into those games at all. I know no one wants to hear that, nor do we want to talk about it, but we'll talk about maybe the aftermath of that series, but more so what we kind of feel in the season in general. Then we have got some exit interviews, some post-game interviews you want to break down because we got some nice quotes from Dame, Giannis, Doc. And then Spencer's got a little game for us of keep or resign or trade and let walk. So we're going to go through all the guys in our roster and decide on those for each person on the team. So then we're going to be looking for additions to this team in the offseason, what we want to see, what we might see happen. And then we'll wrap it up with maybe our way too early dive into the NBA draft, which will be happening a little bit over a month from now. But I think we both got a couple guys that we want to see maybe the Bucks go after, and maybe what we'll actually end up doing with those draft picks too. We could trade them, we could keep them. We got a lot of different options there, what to do with the draft. So, but first, let's dive into our season wrap up category here. But we got to obviously begin with what happened with the Bucks. We ended up losing in 6 games to the Pacers, obviously. Um, in that sixth game, we had a little bit of hope. I think we did it a podcast after game 4, which then we came back and won at home, game 5. We had a little bit of hope, like I said, going into game 6 because there were rumors going around at that time that Damian Lillard could be back, Giannis could be back. We got a lot more information after the series of how realistic that actually was, but what we did see was Damian Lillard did come back, battled through his injury, but clearly wasn't looking right. And then Chris obviously battled through that one as well. And we'll break down really him at the end of the game. Chris was it seemed like he was crying a little bit almost on the bench. And so I guess Spencer with those two things. First, just how are you feeling with Dame? You saw him back in game 6. And then how are you feeling about Chris with his performance really throughout the series?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, even in the moment, I felt like Dame playing wasn't smart on the Bucks or his part. I respected him a lot for trying to fight through it and for trying to give us what he could, but there was there felt like a pretty decent amount of risk to him playing in that game that could have led to some issues for next season. Luckily, we did not see that come to fruition during the game, so that was good, and he played okay. I mean, honestly, he was not moving well, and he was still doing a decent amount on offense, but it wasn't, you weren't going to get a ton out of him. You could just tell. And it felt like Chris, I mean, it was obviously his worst game of the series, but he was also he just looked exhausted. He's playing on pretty much two bad ankles at that point. He was still playing hard and he made some tough shots and he did his thing at times, but he definitely didn't shoot like he had at other points in the series. And that was not surprising. You kind of knew that was coming at some point because he was just carrying such a big load on his shoulders for those first 5 games or for the 3 games prior to game 6 at least. But then, yeah, in terms of the emotion on the bench, he talked about it after the game. He said he wasn't really emotional, but I don't know. It looked like he was a little emotional. I think it was just a matter of he knows how hard it is to make that run, and now it's 3 years in a row where they haven't been able to do it. And every time that season ends, you feel like you put in all that work the whole year. And for him, that involved a lot of trying to stay healthy, fighting through injury, doing a lot of stuff, and then especially in this series, doing all of that without Dame and Giannis for a good chunk of it and without Giannis for all of it. I think he was just more of a not even sigh of relief is the complete wrong word to use there, the wrong phrase to use, but it was more of a like, it's over now. I can't do anything about it. I got to start moving on type of emotion to me. But it sucked to see him that way. It's always hard to see a player you enjoy who looks like they're kind of at a point where they're just dead. And that's what he looked like to me. But I just, for me, watching Dame and Chris battle through what they were going through and trying to do everything they possibly could, I already had a ton of respect for both of them. But if people just the Chris, I'm never going to get over Bucks fans and Chris and their hatred of Chris. It's going to bother me forever. So if you watch that series and somehow still came out of it saying Chris is a problem and that Chris is not good or Chris doesn't, I've seen so many times over the years that Chris doesn't care. Chris is lazy. Like, man, he was fighting tooth and nail to try and give the Bucks a chance to win that series, hoping that at some point Giannis and or Dame would be able to come back. And obviously it didn't work out, but it was it was a tough series. It was, again, just mostly a lot of respect for both of those two for doing what they did to try and win that series. But it felt like if Giannis couldn't come back and at least compete at a pretty high level, it was going to be tough for them to come all the way back in the series. But I don't know if you had anything aside from that, Gunner, on those, really how the series wrapped up.
Yeah, I mean, on those two guys, you hit it right in the head again. With Dame, hindsight 2020, we thought that he probably had the best chance to play in that game six, just based off the fact that he played in that series. And um, although it seemed like a little bit of a tic-tacky injury, non-contact, but it's something that he's battled through before. Um, we found out afterwards that Doc even said himself that he probably shouldn't have been playing, which um, it's like a tire scratch in a car when you hear that, because it's like, oh my gosh, we could have just sacrificed all of next season potentially if something went wrong, just to maybe fight back for a game seven. But like you said, you got to respect a guy like that. I don't remember exactly Dame's quote as far as that goes or why he played, but it was something along the lines of he just didn't want to see his guys fighting for him like that without him on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Which in every other aspect, if you eliminate all of the scariness of it, that's a pretty cool teammate to have who actually just wants to go out there and give everything that he's got, even if it's 25% of himself. It seemed like probably closer to 50% of himself. Like you said, he wasn't really moving great. He still is Damian Lillard, so he made some threes, did some nice stuff on the floor, but he just wasn't moving the same way. But just glad to see that he competed in that one. But yeah, with Chris, yeah, like I thought he was emotional at the end of that game too. I would say I I'm a little upset that we even won game five, and I'm a Bucks fan. Obviously, I want us to win, but um just knowing how much that everyone battled through, but then with Chris specifically, you think back to like game three and how much he poured into that game. I think that's why it gets me more upset, is because you think about like, oh no, we really could have had a chance to win if we win that game for Chris. We're at the very least going to game seven, which would have been awesome. And it's felt like a game that we should have won. So, with Chris specifically, I just keep thinking about that game three where it's just like, man, he did everything you want. Like you mentioned, the fans, it seems like he's getting his praise now, but he just always finds a way to shut the fans up when it comes in time for the playoffs. I think a lot of people forget about how good he was even last year. Even though I know that series was a nightmare too. If you look at the box scores with that, it doesn't tell the whole story, obviously, but he was incredible in that series, and there wasn't a lot of shining lights in that series with our players. And he was the clear, obvious guy who was good. So, yeah, I think trying to think back, like I said, I was mad that I really had no emotions in game five, because I was just like, okay, we're down 3-1. We're at home. We have a chance to win, but I'll just take it with stride. I'm not going to let this hurt me. I'm not going to let this bother me. If we win, we win, and we won. So, I did not have that same mentality for game six. I got my hopes up, and that's why I was upset that we won game five, because it just felt like we didn't have a chance in that series because of how much we were down by as far as injuries go. But I guess we can wrap it up the season first, and our thoughts generally in the season. I guess I can start with this. I think with all the hype and anticipation and acquiring Damian Lillard, which was um, probably the highlight of my Bucks fandom, honestly, outside of the obvious championship that I celebrated and enjoyed very much. I waited for my whole life. If you just remove that little piece of that, I cannot think of a time I was happier with an acquisition, a move that the Bucks made, without playing a basketball game. That was by far the best moment I had. Um, Pretty much everything after that moment was a disaster for me. if I'm being completely honest. If you look at how the season played out, and we've gone through it a million times, maybe Spencer will go through it here with his points, but I don't feel like going through it because it's going to make me sad. But we all know what happened throughout all the different moves that we made. Um, Coaching wise, firings, um, our roster in general wasn't good enough. It really felt like all year you don't make a ton of moves with that. And then having this decent start, but a bad coach, and then you switch the coach, and now you're going pretty bad into the playoffs. Injuries we saw to cap it off this year. You never get to see Damian Lillard and Giannis play in the playoffs together. It's just really a disaster in my eyes. It's for the future wise, I'm honestly a lot more optimistic than I thought I would be about this roster because of the things that we can do this offseason. But yeah, with this season in general, it's just um, and thinking about the expectations and the hype that I was talking about earlier when I started this, um, when you combine that with everything else, it just felt like this really did suck. And I not to mention the fans one more time because I think I roasted them enough in the last Bucks episode. I know that was probably a month ago at this point, but I saw a lot of if you can't handle this in this the way that we lost this series and you couldn't watch us in the 2000s, it's just like we did not think we were supposed to win a championship in the 2000s, and I also was there and I enjoyed those games, and it sucked the same way. But um, like I said, with that hype and all the expectations that we had, that's why it sucked so much this season, is because it felt like a little bit of a waste with, Damian Lillard and Giannis and injuries and everything else. I know that all happened. It's just it really just sucks because you're thinking about the age and the timelines of these guys. But Spencer, hopefully you had a little bit more of an enjoyable season with this Bucks year, but I'm not confident in that. But how did you feel about this Bucks season?
I think I probably enjoyed it more than you just because Dame was my favorite player on any team outside of the Bucks. Getting to watch him in a Bucks uniform, it didn't even go super well at all times. But it still felt pretty special to be doing that the whole time or to be able to watch that the whole time. He he had a lot obviously going on. He talked about that a lot. There was a lot of stuff that happened off the court with him. First time being traded, first time in a new city. There was a lot of stuff that went wrong, and a lot of players have that excuse over the course of a season. There's a lot of things that happen to players. They're humans, they have stuff going on, but it did kind of feel like everything just came crashing down on Dame at once in this scenario. And in the end, he ended up putting up numbers that weren't that different from other seasons he's had in the NBA during his prime. Um, it just wasn't what we thought might happen when you combined him with Giannis this year. And that's, you know what? Season one for tandems of superstars, just they haven't gone super well over the course of time. They've gone fine, like the Bucks, who had a fine season, a 3 seed, 49 wins, right? 48, 49 wins, basically a 50-win
49.
team, which over the course of our lives, that would have been for most of the seasons. I know I understand what you're talking about too, but like over the course of most of our lives, that type of season would have been like, wow, the Bucks are awesome. They had two all-stars, they had guys going off, like it was a fun season. But it's a different time period now. You've got a guy in Giannis who's a legitimate one of the best players of this generation, potentially all time. You have another guy who's pretty inarguably a top 75 player of all time in Dame. You've got a very, very good third option in Chris. Brook is still a good player. And then you added not much around him. And Beasley obviously ended up being fine for the first half of the regular season, but the concerns that everyone had with him ended up showing up pretty obviously at the end of the year, which were he slows down shooting wise at the end of the season, meaning he also doesn't play very well in the playoffs usually. And he actually shot okay in that Pacer series. He had a couple games where he shot pretty well, but all the stuff that you kind of knew was going to be a problem with him ended up being a problem with him. And Bobby, we've talked about Bobby at just enough. We've talked about Bobby enough at this point, and we'll talk about him more when we get to the little game we're going to play in a little bit. But in the end, it all came down to hiring Adrian Griffin for me. I think that screwed up the entire season from the beginning. I think it started everything off on a bad note. A guy that had no respect from his players, who had no respect from from his lead assistant coach, and then that guy ended up leaving before the season even started. The guy who was very, very close with Damian Lillard. It was from the start. I won't use the word disaster like Gunnar did, but it was a mess. It was a big time mess for pretty much the whole season. Nothing ever really felt like it got completely back on track. The only time it did, honestly, was shortly after the All-Star break when the Bucks went on a pretty nice run, beat a couple good teams, beat them on the road even. Um, that was the one time the whole season where I was like, okay, they're starting to play defense. Seems like we're starting to figure some things out. I think we had, well, Chris, yeah, it was going into that Phoenix game, honestly, when Chris got hurt is when things started going poorly again. And it was just, they just never were able to get all three of them on the court together. And that makes it difficult to find a real rhythm with those guys. So I don't know. It was not the season I was hoping for, but like Gunnar said, I do have quite a bit of optimism for next season. It's going to require roster moves, and we'll go through what we want to see and all of that a little bit later. But the general core, working with a coach who I don't love Doc, but I think he's a competent coach, and I did not think that Adrian Griffin was a competent coach. Working with him for an actual offseason, working with him throughout training camp and throughout all of this. And remember, Dame didn't even get to do summer stuff with the team and do any of that. That was a late addition. So a lot of this was kind of thrown together pretty late and then also scrambled to put together again mid-season. And it's not shocking when you look at it that way that things didn't go super well, but you certainly were hoping for a lot better than what we ended up getting. And not even to use the injury excuse, but when you don't even get to see Dame and Giannis play together in a playoff series, that makes it even more tough at the end because you still kind of felt like heading into the last week of the season, like, okay, but we still are going to have the two best players in almost every series that we play in. And in the end, we barely even had the best player in the Pacers series because Dame only played in about half of the minutes in the entire series. And Chris was honestly the better player in some of those too. So it just didn't work out how we wanted it. I wouldn't say it was a complete and utter failure, but I wouldn't say it was good. Definitely would not say it was good. Um, but yeah, I think that's pretty much how we can wrap it up. But there's been some news since the season ended, and we'll start off with Giannis. He it sounds like he really wasn't going to be close to playing. Like game 7 was pretty much out of the question. He said he was able to jog for the first time right before game 6, meaning he was not close to being able to sprint and jump and do all of that stuff. And frankly, it sounds like he wasn't close at all. And that if they were playing right now, it wouldn't shock me if he was still out. Um, I think the Bucks wanted to make it sound like the Pacers needed to be prepared for Giannis and to make them spend time game planning for that, try and keep them from just being able to completely ignore that potential threat. But it doesn't sound like he was all that close. And then in a kind of a sick twist of irony, one of the biggest concerns with Giannis's injury was that it could lead to an Achilles problem, a torn Achilles, if he were to play through it, and he would be putting more stress on the Achilles. And of course, his brother Thanasis goes out and tears his Achilles shortly after the season ends, and that one was a bit shocking. I will say, getting the notification on my phone, and I've got my phone like on the dashboard when I'm driving, and I saw it pop up on my phone while I was at a red light, and then it turned green, and all I saw was torn Achilles Antetokounmpo from Shams, and I was like, I'm gonna drive off the road. And then I got to the next red light and I saw, oh, it was Thanasis. So not to make light of his injury because that sucks. And as much as people poke fun at Thanasis, I do think it's underrated how much the team loves him and how hard he goes in practice and how much he puts in work when he knows he's probably not going to play, when he's not going to do anything, how much he cares for a team that he really doesn't impact very much during games. That type of guy as your 15th man it's valuable. That there's a reason he's been able to stick around, even though he's Giannis's brother. You don't see his other brothers on the Bucks or on an NBA roster right now. Thanasis is still a bit of a step above them because of what he brings in that regard and leadership and the way he's a teammate and all that good stuff. So it'll suck. He's going to miss, you would imagine, the whole next season. And we'll talk about that more when we get to the roster move spot, what we think is going to happen with that. But yeah, that was just a little surprising news, I guess, and like I said, a little bit of an ironic thing to have happen considering everyone was worried about Giannis's Achilles, and it turns out to be his brother instead. But and then on the coaching side of things, Doc Rivers let go of Sidney Dobner and DJ. I don't know if it's Baker or Bacher. It's 2 Ks in Baker, but those were Sidney had been with the team under Bud, but she had been in the video room, I believe, I'd seen her in like the all access videos working with players. So she was an assistant, but I don't think she was on the bench. And then she got added to the bench either Bud's last season or just now this last season for Griffin. And she was let go. And then, like I said, Bacher. And then Josh Oppenheimer is kind of the big one that made some real waves because that is Giannis's shooting coach. And really, he's the shooting coach for the Bucks. And I don't none of us really know that much about what goes on with that and what really happens when they go into that mode of, Oppenheimer coaching Giannis on shooting. But I can tell you, whatever he's been doing, it's not working. And Giannis has gotten into worse habits whenever Oppenheimer's been around. I think he's helped players before. Campaign's weird shot was an Oppenheimer idea that he made work. Um, Campaign could not shoot until he went to that really weird release that he has now. And that was an Oppenheimer design basically after working with him. So I think he knows what he's doing, but it seems like he was not helping Giannis, and that's at the very least. Minimally, he was not helping. On the higher end, there's a good chance he was hurting Giannis. So I'm hoping we bring in a better shooting coach in that spot, somebody who can work with Giannis more comfortably. Hopefully, just get him. I don't care about anything other than free throws. Can we just get him to 75% from the line? If he's doing that, that's going to be like 2 more points a game just off of that. And with how often he gets to the line, it might be more than that, honestly. But and then making some mid-range shots, he showed that fine. Honestly, at the start of the season, he couldn't shoot at all, but the shooting came around as the season progressed. It was more the free throw line just never got figured out. Um, and then per a report right before we started recording, Doc is going to be aggressively pursuing Sam Cassell, who has spent this season on the Celtics staff, but spent most of his career, honestly, under Doc, both with the Sixers and I believe with the Clippers. So that would obviously be a pretty cool return to Milwaukee for him. Well, I don't know if he would care or not, but for Bucks fans, it would be cool to have Sam Cassell back in the organization. So we will we'll see where that goes. But Gunnar, do you have any thoughts on kind of the coaching staff changes or anything along those lines?
With the staff in general, I thought if we do bring in Sam Cassell, you think about the assistants that we've got so far with Rex, Dave Yeager, Joe Prunty, and then now potentially Sam Cassell. I know the NBA staffs are built a little bit more different nowadays, but I mean those are four pretty highly
Yeah.
stouted, whatever you want to call them, assistant coaches, with along Doc Rivers. So. Um, that's why I sort of expected. I'm shocked that Joe Prunty wasn't them, and you know that I'm not the biggest fan of Joe Prunty, but because he's got the two guys that he picked himself, I just figured that maybe that's going to be a lot of cooks in the kitchen. But I'm not sure Doc really cares about that either. And Joe Prunty is a solid coach, as much as I don't know if I like him or not yet. He does bring a lot to the staff, though. But yeah, I thought just with those four guys, if we do bring in Sam Cassell, I think it's going to be a lot, but in a good way. And then obviously Josh Oppenheimer, yeah, I think it's kind of a meme at this point of how much maybe he's hurt Giannis. But yeah, I think maybe, like you said, maybe the problem is that we've been trying to get him to think of it maybe too much big picture, and it's really just as simple as let's just make some free throws, let's just make your short game better, which I'll talk
Yep.
about, I guess, a little bit later with Giannis's exit interview. But um, we just got to perfect the little things for you, and it'll go a long way because it's honestly hurt us a couple times during the seasons. But yeah, I mean, if you have nothing else on that, the last bit of news that we did get was John Horst, and it seems like per report that the Bucks did not allow him to interview with the Pistons. I know that was a big rumor, even before the playoffs. I think that one hit us, and it was potentially going to be for players operations or president of basketball operations. There you go. I messed it up last time too. Uh, but now I know. Um, and as Spencer and I talked about, that he does not have that title with the Bucks. Um, but our thoughts, I guess, right now on the fact that we seem like we want to go forward with John Horst. There's a couple other, one of the owners I think spoke out too and said that this is our GM, and seems like we all have a plan together with him, Doc, in our ownership group that they want to go forward all together. But really, since then, I know Spencer and I have been talking about John Horst a good amount since the season has ended, because what else are we going to talk about? Um, and I was more considering the fact of if he leaves, what's that means for the Bucks and how much he's done for us. I first want to say that he's done a lot for us, and the highlights would be obviously Damian Lillard and Drew Holiday, and just a little championship that he brought us, which was that's nice to have. But like I said, we've had a lot of time to talk about it. Spencer and I have been texting, and I've talked about the Dante DiVincenzo trade a good amount, but um, I was started looking at the moves that he's made over the years, and maybe I've given him a little too much slack on some of these moves that have happened. You think about guys that we picked up late in the season. It seems to be a lot of older players that we pick up, which sometimes that's just what you're left with. It's not really so much his fault, but whether it is acquisitions or whatever, I think maybe he's struck out on some of those moves. But something that Spencer and I really found out was if you go back to that Dante DiVincenzo trade, um, I always think about trade assets as like a sort of like a tree branch and how much you can grow from it. Um, and that's why I talk about Dante specifically. It's like the asset. You got to think back to what it was like back then, where he was not doing very well. He's in a contract year. He's restricted. Personally, I would have just kept him and had him be a restricted free agent. But I also get the other side of it, where it seems like he didn't want to stay here. Also heard that maybe we offered him a contract and he declined it. Doesn't mean that he can't stay here. He's restricted, so we could match whatever he goes out and gets, whatever. But I also understand if he felt like maybe his injury is too much, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Either way, we ended up trading him for Serge Ibaka. And I think on the surface, bad trade. Obviously, we know what Dante turned out to be. We know what Serge turned out to be. But I think where it almost goes wrong a little bit, where if you really look on to asset wise, is where you go into that offseason and I remember us talking about this too, and like, okay, maybe we can give Serge. It's a little ridiculous to give him whatever he was making, probably close to $10 million, but okay, let's give him like somewhere in the $5 to $10 million range because you have his bird rights, which means that you can give him whatever, really whatever he wants. But I know there's some limit on whatever contract he just signed, so probably maxed out at around like $11 million. But the Bucks end up giving him a minimum contract, which on the surface, again, player wise, he deserves a minimum contract. He wasn't good, so I understand that. But he almost closed the door on is when I talk about that trade tree or the asset tree, because now you just shrunk your possibilities for a future trade to just throw him in as a salary dump to get another player. Um, you think about if we could have added $5 million to that contract, how many players that opens up for. In that season, we ended up trading for Jay Crowder, which at the time, I thought it was a decent trade. 5 second round picks for somebody isn't exactly amazing or anything like that, but all the players that we gave up in that trade, I could care less about. Jordan Wara was he was here, um, but he obviously had some offensive stuff that maybe you can tap into, but doesn't matter that much. Um, he might not even be in the league right now. I'm not even sure if he's on a team.
I think he's on the Raptors.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if he was playing, but I know he had a couple of good games with the Pacers. Anyways, long story short, same idea with Jay Crowder is ends up coming here, plays okay when he first got here. Going to the playoffs, doesn't play good at all, gets benched. Same idea where you now have his bird rights and you can do the same thing where he's probably owed $10 million. And then we go into that off season and we end up giving him close to a minimum contract. It was either minimum or just above a minimum contract, which now that goes into this season where it's like, okay, now that door just shrunk again with guys that you can go out and acquire, which um, that's just to me, I think those little things that maybe go unnoticed, where again, Jake Crowder probably deserved that money. I actually thought he probably deserved a little bit more than that. I was shocked that he even got that little of a contract. Now it makes sense because he really didn't do that good this year. But either way, you think about this season and how we could have used one more role player or something. Maybe you could have gave Jay Crowder $6 million and kind of combine that with Marjan Beauchamp or something. Um, you also lost those 5 second round draft picks last year to get Jerry Crowder, but that's different. But that opens up a whole another door that you could have gotten of players. And maybe guys don't want Bobby Portis, but that just gives you different angles. So Spencer, I know, like I said, we've talked about this a lot, but um, does those things I'm not saying this really to have people concerned about John Horst. I think it's also just, again, it was a lot of us debriefing and me debriefing of like, okay, we can survive without John Horst if it happens because he's not this perfect guy that maybe we made him out to be. I should also say before we talk about it, I know you're going to touch on it, is maybe those money moves, which is also another problem, is maybe that's an ownership thing that comes down to John Horst and says, we don't want to push, and we now have a second apron we have to deal with, which wasn't really the case. It might have been when we signed Jay Crowder. They might have
It
just
was,
introduced
yeah.
that. Yeah. Which that could also tie into that. But it seems like, and I would hate that on too, but that maybe the ownership group was like, hey, we don't want to push this tax bill for these 8, 9, 10 man rotation guys that whatever aren't going to have a huge impact. But how did you feel about one keeping John Horst now, and then maybe that idea of how we've mismanaged maybe some assets in the past years, and maybe we can hope to change that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Force does have a major, not even a major, a pretty big flaw. It feels like it is cap management. And I think back to the Malcolm Brogdon restricted free agency and that trade. And that trade, I was totally fine with that trade. Um, I didn't love Brogdon at any point, and I don't think it's a huge coincidence that the teams that he was supposed to help in the playoffs have been pretty willing to let him go and that nobody really went and got him from the Blazers this year. But in terms of all they had to do, they could have got a $13 million trade exception, I want to say at the time, if they signed George Hill like a day later than they did, and they didn't do that. And it was like, well, why would you not do that? What's the point of that? And over the course of time, it's been stuff like that. And like you mentioned, like the Dante trade, obviously not great. I will say that Blazers pick that we have in this draft, which is 33, was part of that trade. So that ended up being a pretty decent asset since that's basically a late first round pick, being 2 picks into the second round. But in general, not a good trade. And like you said, even at the time and in hindsight, like holding on to him and letting him go through that restricted free agency may have been able to convince him that, hey, you're not worth what you think you're worth right now. Here's our offer. You can take it. If you want to get traded at some point, we can always trade you too. Like that type of discussion could have been had. But in the end, that trade's just never gonna kill me. I do think the aftermath of it and Serge more than Jay because of the second apron popping up this last offseason. I understand why they didn't do it with Jay. For Serge at the time, I thought it was a no-brainer to give him 6, 7 million for that 1 year and not worth it at all as a player, not even close. There is more value to an expiring bad player at $7 million than there is to an expiring bad player on the minimum. There just is because a team can match. You have to match salaries, and the other team has to take on the salary to be able to make these deals work. And an expiring deal that's up higher in money in average annual value, that is worth more than a minimum to almost every team in almost every scenario. So not doing that with Serge was really weird to me. You mentioned and I think there's a pretty good chance of this. I don't know that ownership wanted to. You got to consider. I believe it would have been almost 4 times as much money in their luxury tax payment for Serge. So it would have been pretty close to $30 million, basically, is what they're adding to their actual payment structure. If you give them like 7 million, and for a guy like Serge, that is pretty hard to swallow as an owner, I would imagine. But if you are truly trying to compete for championships, you have to allow the guy in charge to be able to do something like that and trust that he's going to get the most out of somebody's contract, whether that is through trade, whether that was Serge figuring things out and actually being a good backup to Brook, which didn't seem super likely, but it also didn't seem impossible. He showed some flashes of fitting in the system that Bud ran. But those types of things they're not great. They're not super well done by Horst, but I just don't think you can find any executive in basketball that doesn't have stuff like that on their record. Like I don't think you could find a single one. People make mistakes, especially when it comes to asset management and stuff like that. And I mean, the 5 picks for Jay Crowder, I would certainly like to have 5 second-rounders because that feels like something we could really turn into something this offseason. But that one honestly hurts me more than the Dante trade in hindsight. That one, it's just not great. Jay's been really, really bad here, but yeah, I mean, I think that's where I would land on all the horse stuff. So we can probably move into the exit interviews, beginning with Giannis, who obviously we talked about it. He didn't play in the series, so he didn't really talk after the game, but he did have an exit interview in Milwaukee a couple days later. And more or less, he talked about how, given how he has ended most of these seasons with his injuries, and we've seen it in the playoffs every year, including the finals run. He obviously had a pretty bad injury in that one. He was just able to play through it in the finals, but he talked about possibly kind of needing to change the way he plays. And I don't remember exactly the context of all of that. And I'm not sure it was a matter of saying, like, I'm not going to go to the hoop. I'm pretty confident he wasn't talking in that way. But um, is it a matter of, I guess, Gunnar, how are you looking at this? Do you think it's as much about how he plays or how much he plays and how much he has the ball and how big of a, like, usage wise and all that type of stuff? Like, is that more important than how he's playing, or is it just kind of a mix of all of that?
Yeah, a little bit of a mix. I think even the way he answered it was how I was going to answer this question because when he threw it out there, he was like, "Yeah, maybe I need to change how I play." But then he's thinking about it and he's like, "Wait a second, how I play is why I'm really good." So I don't want to change too much about how I'm playing. And then I think he went into the fact of, like you said, how much he plays. Where this season it felt like, and I think we even talked about it halfway through the year. It had to be less than halfway through the year because we're used to him getting his breaks with the Budenholzer era, and it seems like he was playing almost every game and nothing on the injury reports. And we're like, okay, this is good, but I don't know if we're handling this perfectly with Giannis if by the end of the year. And it turns out maybe that didn't have anything to do with it, but ended up not being healthy. So yeah, I think, like I said, it's hard to tell him to play a different way because, like I said, that's what makes him great. But I think, like we talked about earlier, he can get better at free throws, which isn't necessarily going to help his health very much. But I think health wise, um, maybe something that I've noticed is, for a lack of better words, maybe don't run through as many guys and leave your feet as much. Uh, but that also goes into what makes him so good, and it's very hard to tell sometimes. His Euro steps always take my breath away in a good and bad way because I'm always scared it's one step away from a season ending for the whole team because if we don't have Giannis, we see what happens. Um, I just it's some combination of I don't want him to not play hard. That's just it's such a fine line. And like I said, Giannis knows it too. That's why it's hard for him to even answer it, considering anything else. But there's got to be a little bit better mix to ease up the wear and tear that you take inside the paint so much that he does. And that's also, like I said, we'll talk about Oppenheimer and what he could have did with him, and he's done it more. But just his short game in general, we saw him last offseason go to, I think that was last offseason when he went to go work out with Hakeem.
Yep.
Um, not sure how that much helps when you're working out with a 60-year-old or whatever, but as much as it is more of like a mentorship, but I think the idea with that was like I need to work on me around the paint, not so much me shooting mid-rangers, not so much me shooting three-pointers, but how do I get my finesse game up a little bit more in those touch shots that actually that seemed like he was a lot better on those
He
this year.
was.
Maybe that went into how high of a percentage that he shot, but doing a little bit more of those things with what you already makes you great to ease up on that, I think um, would not take away from his game as much, but um, also have him still do the same stuff that we love him for doing. I mean, he's turning 30 now, so I guess how long will he even be able to do the stuff that he's doing? I hope it's for the next 5 years, but he's going to have to change how he plays anyways. So um, maybe this is a little bit of a wake-up call to be like, okay, this is when you have to start changing it into that type of player. But that combined with how much he plays, I do think that we have to work in um, some more schedule off days for him. And I'm not sure how the rules work nowadays with sitting guys and who we can't sit, or are we going to get fined for it? I'm not sure. I've seen people sit guys this year too, so I'm not sure how it worked. It seems like you can still do it. So um, I know he wants to play, but you also have to think about maybe, like I said, this season was a wake-up call, and we need you healthy for the April, May, which we're not playing anymore, but April, May, June, hopefully. We need you healthy for those months. So
Yeah.
how would you handle, or how would you tell Giannis to play and to keep him healthy?
I don't think you can tell him to change how he plays, especially from an aggression and a mental standpoint, because that is what makes him great, is that type of relentlessness that he plays with. Um, I do think you can do a much better job of controlling how much he plays and just putting your foot down like Bud used to do, which was, nope, you're sitting today. Nope, you're coming out at 34 minutes for the game. We're basically going to cap you there unless it goes to overtime. We're going to protect you for the long haul. And this was the first injury of all of them that wasn't on like a fluky one play thing. This was the first non-contact one. This was the first one that ended up happening because he was overworked. That's what this one was. And I don't even know that you need him to sit too much more often, but he was playing under Griffin. This started under Griffin. He was playing anytime the game was close, pretty close to 40 minutes, no matter what. Regular season, back to back, didn't matter. And Doc didn't do much better in that regard. I think he lowered it a little bit under Doc, but it was not much. Um, and it didn't hurt that under Bud at times the Bucks were basically just winning by 30 at the end of the third for like a 30% of their game. So he just didn't play the fourth quarter half the time. But it I think that's what they need to control more. I think they need to force him to rest more often. I think he needs to, on his side, understand that being in the gym and doing stuff constantly is good, but there's still a limit to that. And you can't just constantly go, 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 go at the age that you're starting to get to. Once you start getting into your 30s, like you have to take care of your body in a little bit different way than you did when you were younger. So on his side, I think he's got to figure that out too. But I actually think we saw him already start to adjust his play style, and you talked about it with the Hakeem stuff. I thought his footwork was as good as it's been at any point in his career. I think he did learn from that work with Hakeem. In the post, I still don't love posting him up, but I thought he was quite a bit better than he had been at any other point in the post this year as an offensive player. Um, I thought he was more in control when he would get inside a lot of the time. And I do think that the evolved part of his game is just being able to hit little hook shots and little push shots over the front of the rim from the middle of the paint at like a 55-60% clip. Um, he should be able to do that. We've seen him have touch on those types of shots. He really, it's another thing. I'm just not sure what happened because you think back to that finals run, he had a ton of those types of shots during that run, um, including the overtime one against the Nets, and then including Game 6, he hit like five of them. I think he got to 49 points on a touch shot from almost the free throw line or he got to 47 points on a touch shot from almost the free throw line as the shot clock was going off. Um, he showed that type of touch a lot more often, and it was better this year, I think, than last year. At least at one point, it was quite a bit better. I haven't looked at the numbers recently, honestly, but um, I'm still not sure it's a matter of changing how he plays as much as it is how much he plays. But I think that's enough on Giannis. We'll move to Dame. So Dame didn't do a true exit interview because he played in Game 6 and he was on the podium for the Game 6 post game. Honestly, the biggest takeaway there was that he made it abundantly clear that he's happy to be here and that he's looking forward to next season. He really didn't leave any room for doubt in that regard. And while I personally was not very concerned about any of that, I still can't say it hurt to hear him say that. Like it was still really nice to hear him say that and make it clear and really make it so that it would be hard for people to try to make any sort of news out of it. I mean, that was the biggest thing is that he left no room for doubt and it left no ability for people to just go reasonably go and say, yeah, he wants out of Milwaukee. He doesn't want to be here. He wishes he was in Miami, all that stuff. Um, of course, there's going to be people who do it. I think Stephen A may have done it like 2 days after the interview, but there's always going to be people who do it, but they have no leg to stand on after the comments he made. So, did you have anything else that stood out for you from that, or just anything in regards to that comment that he made?
Yeah, like you, I think I just needed to hear that. And looking back, I mean, he gave us plenty of breadcrumbs as to why it was more of a personal thing rather than a Milwaukee thing. But what the fans did is twist that into just him making excuses as to why we're not playing good or why it's not working out with him and Giannis as perfectly as we thought. But what he was saying was very valid. He's a human being, and it's horrible to play in those situations. Um, but yeah, it just was not excuse making from him. But um, I think we all know by now that I do spiral mentally on this when it comes to sports, and I do overreact. So you're probably thinking of all the times this off or this season, where I was just like, "Oh my God, I hope he's gonna stay." Like all of this, like I'm scared he might leave. But like I said, maybe I was more thinking of what I talked about at the beginning of this podcast, where this really was a worst case scenario of a season, um, as far as what he was handed for himself. And I think I was looking a lot into his shoes, and I know it was not at all what he imagined. Even if he wanted to go to Miami, I don't think he cared that much that he was coming to Milwaukee. He was excited to come to Milwaukee. It's just it wasn't handed to him perfectly, and it never really turned around for him too much. I guess he got an All-Star Game MVP, and that was a fun night, but and a three-point contest championship. So we had those things, and that seemed like honestly that seemed like the happiest he was. It seemed like he's pretty happy at the end of the year too, but. Um, yeah, I think it was more just me feeling bad for him and also just wanting the best for our team in this situation. And just I knew it wasn't going to work out this year, unfortunately. But I think going into this offseason, much like he said in that quote, um, it was a 10-15 minute quote, but so well, not that quote exactly, but he talked about how having the same coach, having a real offseason this time, which I guess last year I didn't really think about this at all, but he talked about how he really couldn't train that hard because he knew he was getting traded. And if you get hurt, that trade's not going to go through. So
Hmm.
he just couldn't have a normal offseason really in any facet because you're not with your team. You get traded at the last second right before the season starts. And your conditioning is probably behind. But um, as much as him saying that he's excited to be back next season in Milwaukee, and he seems generally excited about that, it seemed like his little warning at the end where he was like, I think everyone's going to be shocked at how good I'm going to be or how good this team is going to be. I think that's what kind of gave me the chills a little bit, and got me excited for next year because it seems like, he's really locked in. And I don't know if I feel like I don't know if it was a joke, but I saw some people saying that maybe him and Giannis and Chris might all get together or something or this offseason too. So all really, really positive things there. So.
Yeah. No, I'm in the same boat as you. I think that last I kind of forgot about that last part of the quote, which was basically saying like I think people are going to be surprised at how much better I am and the team is next year, and all those points that he brought up. And I think we talked about it a little bit because he mentioned it in like his opening interviews at media day that he had really not had a chance to have a real offseason at all because he was trying to make sure he didn't get hurt. Like he was doing basketball stuff, but he wasn't going full court 5-on-5 because he was worried that was a chance to get hurt, and he knew that that would ruin the plans for the offseason. So it happening so late just never really allowed him to get into true basketball shape. Um, yeah, and I don't doubt him at all that he says when he says he's going to come out and be a much better player this next year. I think there's plenty of reason to believe that, but I guess we'll quickly touch on Doc's exit interview. And I think of all the stuff he said, the thing that stood out the most to me was his talk about needing to get more athletic on the roster. And I think that's something we talked about a lot all season. A lot of people did. It wasn't really a secret. The Bucks are not just old, but pretty slow, pretty unathletic. Without a guy like Ajax on the court, you really were just lacking. It was Giannis. It was pretty much Giannis. And then Dame's a good athlete, but he's nothing insanely special athletically anymore. Um, it was Giannis and Dame, and those aren't really the guys you're banking on to be your athletes. You're banking on them to be your best players. And finding athleticism is going to be super important this year. And we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about what we're looking for and all of that stuff. But I thought that stood out the most to me. Was there anything else that you took from Doc's exit interview, or was it mostly about that quote?
No, it was mostly that. Um, I just thought it's a little ironic, and you said that we don't have the athletes, and I agree. I mean, roster wise, we don't have enough, and that's very obvious. Even if you do play the guys that I said, and we have saw at the end of the season with Ajax and AJ Green, that would have helped a lot if you played those guys 20 plus minutes consecutively, or consistently. Um, Even like I don't love Marjan at all. It's I think with the role players that we did see, I'm just still kind of shocked that we didn't see him, knowing because of how glaring the athleticism was. I was just like, wow, I'm shocked that we're not even trying him out there. Which again, I don't like him, so I understand it, but I also hated our role players, so that's why I'm a little confused there. But um, I think it's nice to know that we're at least all on the same page as far as athletes go, and um, that's going to be. I know, like you said, we're going to talk about at the end here, but no matter what angle we take, as far as what type of player we need, at what position, who we trade, who we don't trade, it's going to be an athlete that we got to get. We got to get guys who can move. who can run. I mean, it was no secret that I think we still might be the oldest team in the league. I haven't checked it. I know last year we were for sure. And I don't think we got much younger. Obviously, we added Ajax, but yeah, I mean, we got to get younger. I don't even think that necessarily means younger when you say you add athletes. I think we could get guys in their prime too who are athletes, but a little bit younger is probably not a bad way to go with that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We'll move in here to our keep slash resign or trade slash let go game we're gonna play here. So we'll start with the core four, what I'm calling them, really big three, but obviously I'm still including Brook Lopez because I want to. Um, all of them are under contract for next year. Obviously, we got Giannis. I'm gonna go ahead and just assume both of us are going to keep Giannis and Dame.
Yes.
I feel pretty confident in Chris. I am. I'm assuming you're going to keep Chris as well.
I mean,
Okay.
just like we've said it a lot, but I mean, if a player comes up and it literally
Yeah.
has to be that, but that
Right.
list is so tiny at this point
Yes.
that, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
realistically, you keep him.
Right. I will not trade him for Bradley Beal. Thank you very much, you absolute morons who wanted to do that last year. I will.
It's going to be Brandon Ingram this year. I've already seen a couple of those tweets going around, but
Oh no. All right. Well, all right, Brooke. I'll go first on Brooke. I am in the keep camp, but the trade, if there is a I'm not shopping Brooke, but I'm okay with trading him in the right deal. That's where I would land on Brooke.
um, it's tough because the guy behind him I absolutely hate, and I'm not going to get into that in a second, but as far as roster goes and the center position, so it's tough because he's our safety blanket and he has been for 5 years, and he's getting older, he's never getting younger. And I just feel like we I would be okay with keeping him, but I also think that it might be time. And if there ever is a time, and I was going to ask you this, if we can get an official read on um, if are we in the second apron, or do we know if we're officially in the second apron or not? Because I think that changes the conversation too, because he's
Yeah, it
our highest.
100% does.
Yeah,
I am operating under the assumption that we are not.
yeah,
After that we are under it, I should say, not
hmm
that we are not in it. Because I pretty much trust Frank Madden completely, and he thinks that Chris's um unlikely bonuses didn't hit, considering he didn't play that much and
hmm
they didn't go far in the playoffs. So in that case, it would probably bring us under it barely. So in that case, we'd be able to combine contracts, which that is how
right.
I'm playing this game right now
Yeah, then
is
I would agree
assuming
with
that we
you.
could do that.
Because if the other way around, if we were in the second apron, he's the highest salary, so that's probably going to be the easiest
Yep.
guy to break down and get some more players that way.
Yeah.
Because we saw that Bobby Portis by himself is not going to do much to get you in a trade. But yeah, I guess I would keep him, but same thing as you, it could go either way.
Yeah. All right. Bobby Portis trade. Um, I'll do it for the next two. Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton, I will trade. I want them gone. I will. I don't want to say I'll take anything for them because I'm not taking like some terrible contract just to get rid of them because that could actually set us back even further. But I'm borderline taking whatever I can get. Now, I do think Bobby has value, and I honestly think watching the Thunder in the playoffs that he's a guy who could fit with them pretty well for what they need, or at least what they think they need. I don't know that they'd get what they're expecting out of Bobby, but the idea of Bobby would fit pretty well with what the Thunder would be looking for, which is kind of a scrappy big who can still shoot, but is also a little bit stronger than what they have right now, which they don't have really a bigger, stronger, big at the backup five or four. Um, so I'm kind of anticipating that being a pretty good fit. And if you trade with the Thunder, you're pretty much guaranteed to get an interesting player because they don't have anyone on their roster that isn't interesting. So, um, and that's actually a way you could clear a little salary and guarantee you are under that second apron because they still have a little bit of wiggle room in order to take more salary on than what they're giving out. So that's my hope with Bobby. You can go ahead. I'm going to assume you are on the same page as me, but I don't know if there's anything specifically you're looking at for those two.
Yeah, I'll take a softer angle because I don't start yelling again. But the only thing with Bobby that I know you raised this a couple pods ago with the Bucks pods, but it seems like he is somehow. I mean, I know guys respect him, but he is a vocal leader on the team. And I don't think that's how you should navigate this offseason at all, is thinking about that. But it will suck, I guess, in that aspect because he is a big voice in the locker room, and all that. But same thing with Brook Lopez. Like now, if we traded Brook for a wing, what are you left with? Because now you're really thinking about what kind of big man you can get or how you can get a big man. Our assets money wise would be limited, but on paper, that's if we're making a ranking of who should go and who we should try to go first, it's these two names for sure.
Yeah.
It's not even close for me.
Yeah. Um, I should note, I think there's a pretty big difference between, for me, trading a guy at the deadline in the middle of the season, in the middle of all
Hmm.
everything going on. Like, I think the chemistry portion of it is important at every point of the season and the offseason and everything. But I think mid-season, it's really hard to get rid of a guy who's seen as a locker room type of favorite or a guy players like or whatever. The Brewers Josh Hader trade is an example of that, where I think a lot of people, the people who made a fair point about that, were that they did it in the middle of the regular season when people just weren't expecting it. And I think that's the kind of thing you could have ran into with Bobby or Pat being traded. In the offseason, I feel like there should be no surprise. I mean, the Bucks traded Drew Holiday last offseason. I don't think most of the team was expecting that. Um, and that's the guy who's literally been named teammate of the year twice. So this is not, Bobby might be well liked, but Drew Holiday is one of the most well liked players in any locker room in basketball, and they still traded him. So in the offseason, I think things change a little bit in that you are just, it's a different angle to look at it from when you're in the offseason. But and we'll move on to, I guess, some of the younger guys who are role players or at least on the cusp of it. So Ajax for me is a keep unless somebody sees him as some huge, huge value that you can throw in and make a trade with Bobby and Pat more valuable. I just don't see any reason to move him. I think there's a lot to like with Ajax. We've talked about it a lot. And then AJ Green is very similar for me. I don't see any reason to move either of those two unless somebody's overpaying. But that's kind of the case for everyone short of Giannis and Dame, even Chris, like we talked about. If it's the absolute right move, where it's going to make you better for the foreseeable future by doing it, then sure. But Ajax and AJ Green obviously aren't worth what Chris is, but just in that type of vein where I would say, like, you got to blow me away to want to move them because I think they both have legitimate futures on the team. Both of them are young and can build with the kind of that next era of Giannis. So those are two that I would keep under almost any circumstance. Do you have any different opinion on those two?
I'll take a hot take route, and I honestly believe this after watching the playoffs and how much I believed in him all year, really from day one. I know you did too, but I think Ajax might be untouchable, honestly. And you think about a player that you want, I think I often refer to him as a Swiss Army knife type of player. Um, I think about how if we're keeping our big three, we'll talk about, I guess, a little bit later with the trades, but you're not necessarily going to get DeJounte Murray. I don't think that's even the best route to take if you're not trading your big three. So that would be a type of trade where you would trade Andre Jackson because you're trying to beef up the deal and get maybe an all-star type of player, but to get a fourth all-star here, which I don't know we necessarily need. So um, I just think we need a lot of players like Andre Jackson on somewhere of the spectrum of Andre Jackson. I know Doc referenced how maybe he got to slow him down sometimes, but man, he does all of the right stuff. And this is in his rookie season. I feel like he did all of the right stuff. And
Yeah.
like I said, maybe he was playing too fast at times or he got out of control. He was fouling too much. But that's stuff that you can really tone down the more seasoned he gets throughout these years. I just can't think of a better guy to have as a role player, and he's going to mesh well with no matter who you have in your lineup. He's just going to mesh really well. So I honestly think that he would be untouchable for me. With AJ Green, keep for sure. Wouldn't be untouchable necessarily, but I think just the fact of something I mentioned a lot throughout the year, and especially in the playoffs, our lack of scorers, guys who are willing to shoot the ball. Um, he is the one outlier in that aspect, and I think he could probably even shoot more. There's probably more potential in there for sure. And hopefully he gets that opportunity next year with more minutes and whatnot. But he just brings something different on the roster that we don't necessarily have, and he brings he's an athlete, like I mentioned too,
Yeah.
and probably can defend. Um, Not amazing, probably, but a guy you're not going to worry too much as a defender. But I think he is in that class of like maybe like a Pat Connaughton at his best, probably even a better scorer than that. A Grayson Allen, honestly. I remember that going back, this is another tangent, but going back to last year, I know that was an argument of like, should AJ Green be playing over Grayson Allen? Which the answer was no, but they are kind of similar type of players, I guess, in a
Hmm.
way. So yeah, I just definitely keep both of those. And maybe I shocked you with my Andre Jackson take that I think I actually would have him untouchable.
Yeah, I mean, if a guy like Herb Jones, if you could trade Pat and Andre for Herb Jones, like someone who's not much older than Ajax and
Yeah.
already established in that role, like I would do that. So I like Ajax a ton, but I also think that that type of trade I would probably make. Um, but I also don't think that type of trade is going to be on the table. So it would take a weird situation for him to be moved for me, but I mean I don't hate it. I love Ajax. I like the pick from the start. Um, he's just that type of dude that I enjoy watching because he just plays solid basketball and he plays hard and he just always trying to do the right thing on the court, and that goes a long way. Um, in terms of somebody who does not do that, Marjan. We're on Marjan, and I'm in full blown like if somebody values him as any sort of asset, I would trade Marjan. And I saw Archon on Twitter. I can't remember how he worded it, but he basically said that if he was wired in a way where he was role player wired versus bucket wired, where he's just trying to score and he thinks he has to play that type of way, like he could absolutely, with the right mindset, be a solid role player. But he seems to think that he needs to be somebody more than that, and he can't be. He doesn't have a good handle. He thinks he does. He doesn't. His shot is very inconsistent, especially when he's trying to create his own shot. If he's catch and shoot, it's actually fine. It's not a bad shot. And that's why as a role player, he could be just fine. Um, and on defense, it's a matter of he loses focus a lot, especially off ball. He is not in the right spot very often. He has all of the tools that you would want. And I don't even think it was a bad pick by Horst, even though my initial reaction to it was to not like it. I wasn't a big fan of the pick. He grew on me a little bit after I looked into him more and found out a little bit more about him. I just worry about his mindset ever being the way it needs to be for him to work out. But I'm in pretty much you trade him if there's any value here, and he's coming up on I think you have to pick up his option soon for the next year. So not for next year, but the year after. And I don't know that I would even do that at this point without seeing a lot of improvement. So I know Dame and Giannis talked him up a lot in the offseason, and that might I think him and Dame like each I think Dame likes Marjan, so that would maybe be the one thing that would keep me from wanting to move him, but I'm sure Dame has had teammates he liked get traded before, so I'm not sure it would really get in the way of anything important. Thoughts on Marjan for you?
We just talked about assets, Spencer, and you're gonna go not pick up his option. You kidding me? But
I'm
I
not sure he's an
think
asset.
yeah, but like you said though too, I don't like what I've seen. I think there's something there. He's what, 6'7", 6'8", 6'6". Like he's a bigger on paper, he's a guy that you would think would actually have some value. It's just it's somewhere in the line of I know we jokingly called him Tony Snell earlier in the year, but that's one, if he could embrace the mindset of Tony Snell, like you said, that would actually be perfect for him. But what we're joking about is that when he went out there, it's almost like he has this mindset of, like you said, of I have to be something more than that, but also you're not getting the opportunities because you're forcing a role player's like mindset, and then he's not doing anything with that opportunity. So it's I don't even know what to think about him, but what I do know is that he didn't play. And I think the most realistic person to be either tied into a trade, his salary is going to be too low anyways, just to swap with somebody. So he's going to be probably tethered to Bobby Portis or Bobby Pat Marjan or Brooke Marjan, whatever it is. So I just think he's pretty much a guaranteed just to spice up a deal at this point. Just for, like I said, I'm shocked he didn't get even a little bit of a chance, but that's probably telling because
Yeah,
they don't care about what to see with him because they don't like what they saw even in practice or whatever. I think Doc even called him Marshawn a couple times
he
in
did.
his interviews. So I don't even think he knows his name.
No. Yeah. All right, we'll do the last younger guy who's on a full contract and Chris Livingston, who I liked every time I saw him play. Honestly, he has a little bit more of the the Ajax type of mentality and mindset, it seems like, than Marjan does. So I think there's a role in the future for Livingston that I could see playing out and him actually being helpful. I think he's strong. I think he can move his feet pretty well for his size. He seems to understand that defense is going to be an important part of what he needs to do, and thus he focuses on it and works really hard on that side. I don't think the jumper looks that bad on catch and shoot. Again, I don't think it's somebody you're going to want creating his own shot super often, but he is okay at, I would say, attacking a closeout and going to the hoop. He can finish pretty strong. He's athletic. He played well for the Herd. That Jazz game sticks out to me for his one real opportunity he got for the Bucks, and he actually played pretty well. He's a guy I would keep, but he's also not one that I wouldn't trade if somebody's willing to come up and give you something for him, or he's needed as part of a package. Like, I'm not going to say no to some package that I really like just because they're making us include Chris Livingston. But overall, I'd like to keep him and continue to develop him because I do think there's something there for a future like eighth or ninth man who could be pretty helpful and is very young. He was a freshman at Kentucky when he was drafted. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on Livingston?
Didn't see a lot of him, but I honestly didn't like him much when I saw him in the summer league. I thought seemed more like a lazier type of guy. Stuff there to like for sure, but I'm like, I don't know. Like this is a fine last pick in the draft, whatever he was.
He
Definitely a
was,
guy
yeah.
worth taking a chance on. But super shocked when he did get his chances. I can't remember the specific games, but I know he had a couple of runs there, especially with the Adrian Griffin regime. Where I was like, holy crap, where did this come from? He has a motor that I didn't never saw. Um, and for end of the bench guy, especially next year, we don't know if they're going to be a 2-for-1 trades or whatever that we make 3-for-1 trades. Um, I think it's definitely worth taking a chance on next year.
Yeah.
Um, would not be shied away from also putting him in just like Marjan, sweetening up a deal and putting him in there. But weirdly, I think I like him more than Marjan is, at least for this exact roster in this team.
Yeah. Same here. Well, I mean, the two ways, I don't think we have much of an opinion on any of them. Ty Washington's the only one we really got to see play for the Bucks. Um, I don't hate the idea of continuing to try to develop Ty. Ryan Rollins, I don't, whatever. I honestly, he's the one I would probably open up and try and add a different two-way spot in. And then Jalen Galloway, we don't really know anything about, but he's an athletic wing who we didn't get to see much of, so I'd probably keep him and just keep trying to find out what he's got. Those are spots that just kind of rotate throughout the season anyway, so it's not that big a deal. Do you have any huge thoughts you want to share on the two ways?
No, Ty is just the one that you look at first round pick a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
We have a lack of ball handlers, which I'll talk about with
yeah,
guys that maybe we need to acquire. So it's like maybe there's something there and there's a lot of talent there, but hasn't even really gotten a shot with us. So I
right.
don't care much either way.
Yeah. All right, free agents to be. So I'm just gonna run through my opinion on all of them quickly. I'll let you do that after. We're gonna be this is gonna be a long episode. Beasley, I would I would say if he's a vet minimum again, I would bring him back. I wouldn't want him to have the same role, but I would bring him back if he's on a minimum again. I'd have no problem doing that. I don't think he will be. I would let him go. I don't think we can re-sign him. We don't have bird rights or anything to re-sign him. So if he gets more than the minimum, I'm fine letting him go. Bev, I would say on the minimum, I'm still happy bringing him back, but I don't care that much. Um, I would like to see him back. We won't see him for the first 4 games if he's back, but I would still be fine seeing him back. Crowder can go. I just don't think it's going to happen here. Gallo can go. I don't even know how he's still playing in the NBA. And then Thanasis, with his Achilles, I would see if he wants to coach. I genuinely would, I think, or at least be, on the staff in some sort of way where he can be around the team, but not taking up a roster spot while he's unable to play the entire season. Do you have different opinions on any of them? I'm guessing Bev is the one we might differ on a little bit here, but yeah,
Yeah.
what do you got?
Yeah, Beasley would have to be a minimum, I'm almost positive. And for the minimum, again, he's a good regular season player. You need guys like that. Um, and I mentioned their lack of scoring a lot. He's going to help that in the regular season, help guys take time off and just give him the ball sometimes to go score. Um, so I wouldn't hate it as a minimum, but I'm also not dying to have him back as far as a guy who's actually going to help us by April, May, June. Because we saw it does not work out, and who would have guessed that? We did about 100 times. But And the rest of the league, I think, knew that too, except us. But Pat Bev, I wouldn't hate bringing him back. I think he does bring a little bit more than what even I thought he does. But after this season and all the antics that we had and all the news headlines that we made, and he capped it off in maybe the most historic way possible. And I'm not going to explain the whole scenario, what happened on the bench when our season ended, but I'm sure everyone knows by now he's going to be suspended for 4 games going into next year. I just don't want to deal with the headache of what he brings sometimes. Um, Player wise, I don't care if he's back. Like that's totally fine if he's back. I just don't want to deal with the headache that he brings. I thought he actually contained himself most of the season when he was with us,
He
and
did.
then the most dramatic blow up you could have to end it, which not a good thing to do. I think he also had a quote here quick where he was like, "I think I earned more money, uh, based on how I played in the playoffs," which I guess you might have outperformed a minimum contract. Like that's fine. Technically on paper you did, but um, go get it somewhere else if you want more money. I'm
Yeah.
not going to
Well,
worry about
we
that.
again we can't offer him more than
Right.
the minimum. So
So enjoy
if he
it if
does
you want to
want it,
go.
he's got to go elsewhere. Um,
Um, yeah, quickly, Crowder. I don't hate him. I don't love him. I think maybe in a perfect scenario with our lineup, he's fine, but he didn't even play that much, so he can go. Thanasis under the bench. He can stay here as long as he wants, as long as Giannis is here. And then Gallo, I'd be shocked if he's on a roster anywhere next year.
yeah,
Um, but yeah.
yeah, 100%. All right, we'll look at kind of what we are looking for the team to add then. So along those lines, I guess what are you looking for? It could be specific players, but it's probably going to be more like specific archetypes, certain types of players, meaning like a wing stopper, an athletic big, that type of thing. So what are you looking for the Bucks to add, whether it's via draft, free agency, trade? What type of players do you want to see? Obviously, we talked about athleticism, but just outside of just that one thing.
Yeah, I stole my thunder a little bit because I one glaring hole that we had first, I think, was ball handlers. Maybe not the most obvious thing that we needed because I'll list a couple things off here in a second where those are the more obvious ones, but you saw what happens when Dame goes down, who we are left with, and we had Pat Bev, fortunately, I guess, or unfortunately sometimes, but we had him and he did a good job. But even when we couldn't even survive with him off the floor sometimes. Um, and that's something that like Joe Ingles, I know, brought last year kind of sneakily too, a guy who can handle the ball. Um, Normally you'd have Giannis too, who would help, and you'd have Chris and all those guys. But maybe a sneaky one that we could pick up a decent backup point guard or just a guy who can handle the ball, whatever the guard position is. Defenders, obviously, we need plenty of those. Athletic defenders. Could get that in the draft, could get that via trade, depending on who it is. I mentioned the bench scoring too, a guy who's not afraid to shoot. Maybe a Malik Beasley type of replacement. I wouldn't hate if we assume that he's going to get make more money and leave somehow, go somewhere. You're probably going to have to replace that type of player, whether that's AJ Green maybe stepping up too, and then you replace the AJ Green role. I don't know, but I think the biggest one for me is a little bit of the defender. I guess I'm tied for the biggest one. We need wing defenders, but for me, I know we're probably going to agree on this part is a more athletic, switchable, mobile big is what I really want to see this team. Um, Something that we've never had really since I can't even remember. I know Brook Lopez has been plenty fine, but he's not even necessarily that. Um, he's more of the obviously the drop defense, and at his peak, he was moving pretty well when he was on defense, maybe 2022-ish, whenever he was up for Defensive Player of the Year. So I think getting a little bit uncomfortable, but getting more comfortable with a guy like that, I think could help. A couple names. I mean, Nick Claxton, I know is a restricted or unrestricted free agent, one of those. Um, and it'd have to be a sign and trade type of situation, I believe. But I would not hate if you sent Brook Lopez for Nick Claxton or something and put Brook back in his franchise leading scorer role in the Nets or something like that. But maybe not a guy who fits perfectly with Giannis. They both can't score, or he can't stretch the floor with Giannis, or they're both going to be in the paint maybe a little bit too much together, and that could be an awkward fit. I could see that. John Collins, I think, was one name that I wanted to bring up too. Um, these guys obviously being in the trade aspect. I know you've got a guy in the draft that you want to see. But I know we're tied to John Collins in the past. different roster. I don't even think we had Dame at that point, so maybe it looks different now that we have these guys. I don't think it should look too much different, but salary wise too, I think you can maybe put together something that all the guys that we talked about trading, you might be able to get up to John Collins without giving up Brook or giving up Brook. I'd have to see, but yeah, those are two names that I think could help as far as trade goes. But maybe on your priority list, how are you ranking these, Spencer? What the Bucks need?
Yeah, well, honestly, I saw this tweet from Eric Nohelty, I think is how it's pronounced, Nohelty, a couple days ago, and he ranked the four biggest needs as one wing defender, two athletic big, three wing scorer, and then four backup point guard. So I don't think I think that's pretty accurate. That's pretty much where I would
Hmm.
put what the Bucks are looking for this offseason. Um, but I think what you kind of have to look at it as is that for me, rookies often struggle defensively in the NBA. So if I'm looking for defense on the wing, that's when I'm probably looking for. You might draft a wing in one of the two, with one of the two picks, but if I'm looking for a wing stopper this year, I think you have to go out in free agency or in a trade to go out and get somebody like that. So I'm looking at a guy like Kenrich Williams, who's barely been able to get on the court for the Thunder in this series. Um, that's a guy who I think they should be playing more, and I think it would be helping them. That's a guy I would absolutely love to have on the Bucks. Um, Oddly, very bad free throw shooter, but he shot pretty well from three for most of his career. A guy I've wanted for a long time on the Bucks. I think he would be a perfect fit. That's somebody I would take as like a wing defender type of player. Like you said, we're going to talk about the draft in a minute, but the athletic big, like there's one name in particular that I really, really like. And there's a couple that are pretty interesting in that type of mold for the draft. And I think that's probably the better place to find somebody along those lines is that a young athletic big rather than trying to find somebody who might be starting to age out of their prime or whatever in that type of mold. And then when you look at the wing scorers, I think that's probably a younger guy too. You're probably looking at that in more of a, if you go wing, you're probably doing that more like if you're doing that in the draft, you're probably looking for more of a scorer in that range. So again, we could talk about that when we get to the draft part in a minute. And then a backup point guard. I think Pat Bev does solve a decent amount of the problems there, but I do think you still want a younger one. Maybe they believe in Ty enough to just say like one, they could give him a full contract if they want to. Or two, they could just say we really like him and we'd like to keep him on the two-way. It might have been a 2-year deal on the two-way. I'm not 100% sure on that or not. But that could be the option too. But otherwise, there's going to be some options in the draft, and there's always backup point guards out on the market. You just need somebody who, like you said, Gunnar, can reliably handle the ball. And it would be my preference to have one younger one to do that because with Dame and Bev, there's always risk of just injury and they're older. So, like, both of them are going to miss some time for sure throughout the season. So, one younger point guard on the roster would be nice, but that's how I would rank them. So I think we could talk about the draft here to wrap things up a little bit. And the Bucks ended up with pick number 23, ironically swapping with the I don't know, did they end up swapping with the Pelicans? They have back-to-back picks. I think
Yeah, they did. It was
yeah,
two picks apart, or yeah, one pick apart, but they did swap.
yeah. Oh, that's right. So I think we would have had the 21st pick, but we swapped to
Yep.
23 with the Pelicans. We had the same record as the team that we were swapping with, but there was a coin flip, and that's how it all worked out. So either way, the best we were going to do is 22, I believe. Um, Either way, 23 and 33, that's the Blazers pick. That's the one we got in the Dante trade. So we'll look at it from a few different perspectives here. So Gunnar, I guess from your perspective, should these be openly available for trade? Are these things we're trying to use in a trade, or is it more of a case where if a team, if the right deal comes around and the first is needed or the second is needed to make it happen, you move it. Um, and then I guess on the same vein, should they use one or both of the picks? Is it more just by whatever happens and you kind of have to feel it out as it goes?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of that of see what happens, but along the lines of like a Marjan or AJ Green or one of those guys as assets. If a trade needs to happen and we like one of the players that maybe we talked about acquiring and you have to give up the first or second round pick, that shouldn't deter you from getting that player, I think, because we'll talk about it with these draft picks. I think this draft is pretty crazy in the fact that anybody can go anywhere, it feels like. Very hard to depict where each guy will go. We'll talk about that too, but not the best draft in the world, I guess, on paper. So if they want somebody in this draft that badly and we can get a guy who's going to help us
Yeah.
right away, definitely would not mind doing that. But I would like to see us keep one of these picks if we can, at least. I think even on paper, it seems a little unrealistic that we keep both and then it plays out just because I think there's going to be a lot of roster changes as far as trade goes. So it's just going to be weird to have like, I mean, we went over all the young guys. I mean, we would have five young guys on first, second, third years. We like a couple of those guys, but like you said, they're not going to impact usually right away. So you're basically taking two guys that aren't going to impact you maybe immediately, which is a little hard to believe if we just maybe punted this year a little bit. I think we're going to want to have a chance
Yeah.
to win a championship. So, yeah, I just wouldn't be. I'm fine either way. What happens, I guess.
Yeah. I would definitely like for them to at least use one of the picks. I do think you have to keep adding young talent to the
Hmm.
roster as much as you can. Um, but if the right deal comes around, there's never an untouchable draft pick, in my opinion. Um, they're all in the end that they're not lottery picks, but they're lottery tickets. And you can do all the scouting and everything you want to do, but sometimes Anthony Bennett goes number one and Giannis doesn't, and that's how the draft goes. And you get Rudy Gobert in the 20s, who's had a fantastic four-time defensive player of the year career. Like the draft has a lot of ups and downs, and it's hard to actually not everybody nobody hits on all their picks. The Heat do their best to do so, but most teams don't hit on all their picks. So it's it's a spot where the Bucks are in a weird spot. Now, what I wouldn't hate is seeing if 23 and 33 can be moved up into like the teens to see
Hmm.
if they could combine those to make one pick and make it a higher likelihood of getting somebody they really like. Um, but that's probably the one way I would say like I'd absolutely move those picks together as if it's to move up in the draft. I would have no problem with them doing that because I do think that just gives you a better chance at getting who you want and getting somebody that you actually think can help the team. But let's say they do use at least one of the picks. Are there any names that stand out right now? I have one, but I don't know. You know who it is, so don't take it. But
I know.
do you have anybody standing out to you right now?
I'll leave the one guy to you, and I'll stay. If we keep the first round pick, again, I don't know where all these guys will go. I'm gonna be on the same page as wanting to get a big man maybe at that first round pick, but um, going a different path than what you did. I saw this guy from Baylor, Yves Missy or something like that. Um, Seems like a little bit different of a guy that I was talking about, a hustler, rebounder, shot blocker, going to be a lot in the paint, which isn't amazing. I'm not sure how much he actually shot the ball, but seems like a guy that we could a little bit different of a player. Like I said, maybe more in the athletic rim running type of guy. He's going to bring high energy. Rebounding, I think I saw that he had like a good offensive rebounding percentage too. So um, we need rebounding. We saw that in the playoffs, especially offensively. That was horrible for us. So, um, and if we do keep the second round picks, um, weirdly, I don't watch a lot of college basketball, and I watched obviously a little bit of the Marquette games. If we keep the second round pick, and if I'm going the big man route, Oso, I don't know what his last name is either,
Igaro.
but um, yeah, I liked him for similar reasons. But I also liked him. I felt like he had more of a pulse, if that's the best way to put it, where he had more of a floor general vibe to him,
Hmm.
which feels like maybe he could play not like an AJ or Andre Jackson, but he kind of got that little bit of a thing to him where I feel like he will be able to play with our guys, um, and be able to handle it. But I don't know about his rebounding and stuff like that. I just liked his like I said, maybe pulse in the game I was impressed by. But I also will throw this out there. Uh, Bronny James, I would not mind him in the second round. I might even another guy where I could literally see him going 15. I could see him going 50. I have no idea where the crap this guy's going to go if he even stays in the draft. But I liked his last quote that he had. Everyone's been comparing him to Drew Holiday since he's been 16. I don't know how old he is now, but the fact that he's pretty self-aware. He's like, yeah, I wanted to be like a Drew Holiday, Devin White type of guy. Um, that would be awesome to have, and I like a lot of the stuff that I see out of him. Um, And for the second round pick in this type of a draft, I think the value there is pretty cool to have too. Of he could be anything really, and he's got all the tools to be a good player. So um, I don't think he'd even play right away for us, but a fun project to maybe have. But I liked
Yeah,
his teammate too. I think he'll probably be like a lottery pick, Isaiah Collier or something.
yeah.
He'd be more
Collier, yeah.
offensive though, and I don't know how much he'd bring defensively, but maybe to replace like a Malik Beasley type role. So what
Right.
do you got?
Yeah. Um, Sticking with the big man route, this is my number one. Like this is the guy I really, really like for the Bucks this
Mhm.
year, and that's I believe it's Khalil War, but it's Kel apostrophe El Ware, I should say. Khalil Ware, out of Indiana. Obviously, I watched him play against Wisconsin or once. He was out for the first game, but he went 11 of 12. He absolutely destroyed Wisconsin, who actually handled big men pretty well this year. Like Edey didn't really go crazy against the Badgers. Not too many teams were able to get their big men going. They mostly got beat by shooting, and Ware just demolished them. And he did it from all levels. And that's kind of the thing that stands out to me with the guy like Oso. There's really not a shot there. Um, and I'll say with Ware, he didn't shoot very well from the free throw line. He shot 44% from three, but that was on less than two attempts a game. So it's not like it's something where I think he's a fantastic shooter right now. I know he shot well at the combine during the drills. I like his shot. I think it's a shot that he can make in the NBA. But he is a very, very good athlete. He blocks a ton of shots. He goes after a ton of shots. He's very he's good laterally. He moves well all directions. He has a motor on defense, which is very important. I'm shocked that to me, I will say I haven't done a ton of research on this year's draft. Um, but based on what I hear about the top of the draft, I mostly just look at people who are rumored to be in the range of the Bucks. Um, what I've heard about the top of the draft, it feels like Ware should be going a lot higher than what I'm seeing in mock drafts. And I think the Athletic had the Bucks getting him in the second round, and I don't see any way he's there at 33. Um, 23 feels feasible based on what we're hearing about him, which is that he's a late first. I think he would add every single thing that you're looking for. I think there's the possibility that he's a guy who can shoot threes down the line, which is something Brook brings as a floor spacer. I think the defensive rim protection is there, which is something that Bobby doesn't have, that other big men don't have. I wouldn't say he's a ball handler, but he's capable of dribbling the ball. He's very fast, especially without the ball. So he's one of the guys who could just get out in transition. In some ways, it's kind of a Miles Turner type of prototype. But I think Ware plays with a bit more aggression on defense than Turner does, which is kind of the knock I have on Turner is that I don't think he's very strong and he doesn't play super hard on defense. Or focused on defense. I don't even know how I would describe it, but it's not. I don't love him as a defender, even though he blocks a decent amount of shots. Based on what I've seen of Ware, I don't think that's the case. I think he's a legitimately solid rim protector. So he's my number one, and then I'd say on the wing, there's a couple names that I liked. Well, Tristan da Silva of Colorado has a really nice looking shot. I think he can score on his own as well, so I like him. Hunter Salas is a name who I know the Badgers were actually pretty in on him as a recruit because he was pretty good friends with Chucky Hepburn, ironically. But he went to Gonzaga, and then he ended up at Wake Forest as a transfer, and he broke out when he got to Wake Forest. Obviously playing in a good conference there, so it's not like he went to some really low-level school and just dominated. He just got more of an opportunity to handle the ball more and have the ball in his hands more often, and he's pretty interesting. And then Alex Caravan of UConn, just a really, really good shooter, but it's not just a catch and shoot type of guy. Like he's capable of doing movement shooting, and he played good defense on a team that demands it at UConn. So I have no problem going after UConn players of any kind, just with the way that Hurley coaches. They are not able to be lazy on defense. They're very well prepared for the NBA. I think we saw it with Ajax, his ability to kind of figure out things right away. Um, Give me all the UConn guys if you got them. If they're legitimately talented, like I'll take UConn guys anytime. So that's where I would be on these picks. Gunnar, you got anything else to add on the draft before we hit our random bucks?
I was just gonna ask you, it seems like a popular pick between our mock drafts, and I know you're probably gonna know where I'm going with this. What happens if the ticker reads Zach Edey to the Bucks. How you gonna react to that?
Probably a lot better than a lot of people, honestly. First of all, I don't know if you saw the video of him shooting at the combine at all. Did you see
I
that?
did, yeah.
Yeah. He was
Kind of
doing
looked
it
like
on
Nikola
movement and
Jokic a
stuff
little bit.
too. It's a Brooke Lopez level shot in terms of being very, very slow,
High
but also being
release.
7'4" and nobody's going to block it. So
Yeah.
you have, I think it's funny. I think in college terms, he was somewhat overrated. I think in terms of NBA prospects, he's somewhat underrated. He would not be my pick because he doesn't fit the athletic mold. But if they are hoping to mold the next Brooke Lopez type of player, I actually do think he might be capable of doing that. I think he's a better athlete than people give him credit for. But my preference would still be to go the athletic route and to try and go away from that mold and potentially get the best of both worlds rather than trying to have two different players create that. Why don't we have one player who might be able to do all of these things for us? So that's where I would land, but I would not, like I said, I don't think I'd hate it as much as a lot of people would because he won't get the whistle he got in college for sure. He won't be as productive. He won't be anywhere near as productive. But I think people genuinely don't give him enough credit. He has very good touch, like really, really good touch from hook shot range, from the front of the rim, just kind of push shots. He went way up in free throw percentage over the course of his career. He made huge strides in that regard. Like I said, the shot looks okay from three. It looks playable. Like he could, if he's wide open, he's able to shoot it. And the NBA is continuing to force that upon bigs, so he's not going to be allowed to pass those up. And I think he's capable of making them. So he wouldn't even be in my top tier of Bucks picks that I would like, but he wouldn't be in like the group of players that I'm absolutely against them drafting. So that's where I would land. But why don't we finish this off with our random Bucks, Gunner? So what do you got there?
I picked Rafer Alston, which, if you know his name, his nickname was Skip to My Lou, I believe. Uh, I think he was part of the and one basketball. There's some lore to him that there's a
Oh
cool
yeah,
story in there somewhere, but he was on the 2001 Bucks. Might have been a couple years on the Bucks, but um, like I said, his nickname was Skip to My Lou because he had a crazy hoop mixtape with the and one. I don't
yep,
even know. It was a huge thing back then. I think they had like tournaments or something they would do.
oh yeah,
Um, but like I said, I don't know his backstory exactly. I don't know if we literally just picked him up from there, or he got drafted and then he went to there, and then he made it back to the NBA doing that. I just know there's a cool story in there somewhere. But um, as much swag as you could have as a basketball player, ball handling wise, and then he actually ended up being a pretty solid player. I think he went to the Rockets. Um, I think he was scoring pretty decently too. I don't know if he was ever a great shooter, but he was on some good Rockets team with like Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming. So yeah, made a good career, and then like I said, has a cool hoop mixtape. So um, I wouldn't mind getting the Rafer Alston purple jersey. That'd actually be pretty cool.
it would. Yeah, that would be a cool jersey. I think I've seen that at games at times, but yeah, it looks like the Bucks drafted him in '98, and then he did not play for the
Okay,
Bucks
yeah.
that year, and it looks like that was probably when he went on. It actually says he played in the Chinese Basketball Association that year, so I
Huh.
think he was the and one mixtape before getting I think he got drafted out of and one, which is kind of crazy to think about. I'm trying
Yeah,
to
maybe that
see.
was it.
He went to Fresno State, so I don't know. Honestly, I don't remember, but it was skipped my Lou for sure, and it was an and one type of thing.
It
Um,
says 1999. He was on the and one mixtape tour
okay, and then on
before
99 he
joining
was
the
a Buck.
NBA. Yeah, so then yeah, right. But he might have got drafted, like you said, out of that.
Yeah, interesting. Well, yeah, he definitely had a much better career after he left Milwaukee. That's for sure. He actually got up to 14 points a game and averaged double digits for like 8 years there. Um,
Mhm.
But yeah, he was fun to watch. I remember him on Orlando in 08, 09. I remember watching him play a couple times against the Bucks, I believe. Um, and he was just always kind of moving around at the end of his career. But Houston is definitely where he was known the most. I went with Larry Sanders, and we were talking about athletic bigs. I felt like I kind of had to go this route. I can't believe neither of us have talked about him yet. Um, Honestly, like the 2012, 2013 Larry Sanders was one of my favorite Bucks seasons of that era because he was blocking shots like crazy. He was all over the place. Um, he had incredible defensive instincts, like really, really good. He was in the right spot all the time, very athletic, like I mentioned, and he blocked a ton of shots. And then on the other side of things, he would also absolutely lose his mind at times, and that was fun to watch too. Nothing will be better than the thumbs up ejection when he was walking around giving thumbs up to every ref and then got tossed. Um, the Pacers fight is always one that stands out as well. But honestly, I feel like it has to be mentioned that it was never brought up really until later, but Jason Kidd is the one who ruined his mental health. It's come out. It's come out. He's talked about it that Jason Kidd is the reason he retired at the age of 27. Um, and then obviously came back 2 years later. But Jason Kidd completely ruined his mental health, and he ruined mine too. So I feel a
I was gonna
connection to
say,
Larry
yeah,
Sanders. Um, no, but honestly, one of the things that I remember most from Sanders, and he had that great 2012-13 season. He was hurt a lot the next year. Um, but I remember when James Harden, the first James Harden Giannis incident that we had, Harden ran into Giannis on the sideline, and the first person to step in between was Larry Sanders to back up Giannis. And he's had nothing but great things to say about Giannis over the years, Larry as well, and just how immediately you could tell he was different. So shout out to Larry. I know a lot of people didn't like him because of how things ended, but I'm blaming Jason Kidd, which is pretty much my go-to for everything from that era. Um, he ruined he damn near ruined his life for a while there because Larry was straight up having a mental health crisis because of how Jason Kidd treated him. Um, God, I hate that dude. I hate him so much. Yeah, that's where I'm at with Larry. That 2012-13 season was really good. He was seventh in Defensive Player of the Year, third in Most Improved Player. He almost averaged the double-double. He was just short in rebounds and points, but 9.8 points, 9.5 rebounds, 2.8 blocks, which is a huge number. Um, he was a fun player when he was on the court and when he wasn't getting ejected. But even when he was getting ejected, it was fun. So his comeback with the Cavs was very short-lived. I remember a lot of people were not happy when he was all of a sudden playing in the NBA again. Like, wait a second, you're supposed to be getting paid by the Bucks playing for them, but it didn't last very long. And then he went into skateboarding, and I believe he started an OnlyFans last year. He's had a wild journey thanks to Jason Kidd. I don't know if it was all Kidd's fault, but there was clearly a little bit going on with Larry to begin with. But yeah, mixing two psychotic people together probably didn't work super well, unfortunately. Yeah, what a fun way to wrap it up. That's all we got for this one. So please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod. And please feel free to leave feedback for us on how we can get better. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time with some more Brewers content.
go Bucks.